In this quick tutorial, I'll show you how quadratics are used in the business world. And we'll be doing this by discussing an example where we look at profits versus contracts sold. Let's begin by reading the question, and then we'll have a discussion from there. The question asks, the profit of an advertising company is represented by the equation p is equal to negative 2x squared plus 220x minus 2000, where p is the profit in thousands and x is the number of advertising contracts sold. Determine the number of contracts that must be sold in order to result in a profit of 0. So the two variables that we're looking at are profit P and the amount of contracts sold X. And while it's not immediately clear, the amount of profit depends on the amount of contracts sold. Logically, that makes sense. And so we have an equation that is written in terms of X. Now, to give you a visual of what this looks like, if we were to graph this on a 2D plane, we have something that looks like this, where the relationship between the amount of contracts sold and the profit is perfectly parabolic. And that's the shape that we see here, where we have a maximum at the vertex, which is the turning point, and the curve crosses the horizontal axis in two places, over here and over here. Now, everything above that point and that point generates a profit that is greater than 0. Take, for example, a point found here. A point found here would have a profit of 2,000. A point found here would have a profit of 1,000. Anything below this and that generates a negative profit. Notice that if we place a point here, we end up with negative 500. The question is asking, when is the profit 0? And it's pretty clear from this visual that the profit is 0 if the amount of contracts sold is 10 and the amount of contracts sold is 100. Either one of those will generate a profit of 0. But this visual wasn't provided in the question. We have to algebraically find out those values of x being 10 and 100 that will generate a profit of 0. So, how do we find these two numbers using plain old algebra? Let's get started. The first thing that you want to do is set p equal to 0. So in our equation written up here, we'll write down 0 is equal to negative 2x squared plus 220x minus 2000. Because there are two instances of x, that is, this term has an x and that term has an x, we can't simply solve this by moving around terms and isolating for x that way. Instead, we'll use the quadratic formula, which is a formula designed to simply give you the values of x that we are seeking. Here's what it looks like. We have x is equal to negative b plus minus, and if it's your first time seeing this, I'll explain in a moment. B squared minus 4ac all divided by 2 times a. B represents the coefficient of the x term, so that is b. A represents the coefficient of the x squared term, that's a. And c represents the constant. That's the term that doesn't have any variables multiplied to it, so that is c. Now be mindful that there are many other ways that we can find these values of x, but I've decided to use the quadratic formula instead. So now that we have b, a, and c, we can go ahead and substitute it into our formula. We have x is equal to negative 220 plus minus the square root of 220 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 2000. All divided by 2 times negative 2. Let's now simplify what is found within the square root. I'll use my calculator for this. 220 to the power of 2 minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 2000. This gives an amount of 32,400. And we'll also simplify the denominator, which is negative 4. Now, because we have a plus minus here, this means that we'll get two values of x. The first value can be found by using only plus. Let me show you what I mean. So I'll take negative 220 plus the square root of 32400, and that gets divided by negative 4. We end up with an x value of 10. So that happens when we choose plus. Now we can go ahead and modify that so that it is minus instead. So negative 220 minus the square root of 32,400 divided by negative 4. And we end up with another x value that is 100. And so what this means is that P is equal to 0, or the profit is equal to 0, when the amount of contracts sold is 10 or 100. On a similar note, if you happen to sell fewer than 10 contracts or greater than 100 contracts, it will result in a negative profit. The goal of this company, obviously, is to sell the amount of contracts that will lead to the maximum. Interestingly, you can find out the amount of contracts that will lead to the maximum by taking the average of these two numbers. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. And so there you have it. That's one example on how we use quadratics in the business world.